The envelope has been sitting in my glove compartment for 11 days. I haven't opened it. I can't explain why. It's not fear exactly, more like I know that once I open it, something shifts, and I'm not ready for things to shift. Not yet. So every morning I get in my car, I look at it sitting there between the registration and an old Chick-fil-A receipt, and I drive to work without touching it. My grandmother gave it to me at my sister's graduation party. She pressed it into my hand near the back door of the house, while everyone else was inside arguing about where to order dinner from, and she said, "Don't open this until you need to. You'll know when." Then she squeezed my fingers and walked back inside like she hadn't just handed me something that would change my entire life. I should back up. My grandmother, we called her Gram, was the kind of woman who kept things. Not in a hoarding way, not in a sad way. She kept things the way people used to, deliberately, like objects had weight and memory, and deserved to be treated accordingly. Her house in Asheville smelled like cedar and old paper. She had a drawer in her kitchen that was just for string. She ironed her pillowcases. She wrote letters by hand on cream-colored stationery and kept carbon copies in a box under her bed. My aunt used to roll her eyes about it. "Mom lives like it's 1958, she'd say, laughing in that way that isn't really laughing. My aunt, by the way, is the reason I'm telling this story. Her name is Denise, and she is my mother's younger sister. And from the time I was old enough to understand family dynamics, I understood that Denise was the one everyone organized around. Not because she was the most capable, she wasn't, but because she was the loudest and the most willing to make things unpleasant if she didn't get her way. My mother was gentle. My mother apologized when other people bumped into her. My mother spent 30 years making herself smaller so Denise could feel bigger, and I watched it happen, and I didn't understand it until I was older, and by then certain things had already been decided. Gram lived with us for the last 4 years of her life. She had a small room at the end of the hall with a window that faced the backyard, and in the mornings I would sometimes find her sitting at the edge of her bed with a cup of tea, just looking out at the yard, not doing anything. She wasn't sad, she just liked to look. Denise visited twice a year and acted like it was a tremendous sacrifice. When I was 22, I graduated from nursing school. Gram came to the ceremony. She held my hand in the parking lot afterward and told me she was proud of me, specifically not in the general way that people say it at graduations. She said, "You're going to take care of people your whole life, Margot. Just make sure you let someone take care of you too." I thought it was just something grandmothers say. I didn't understand she was telling me something. She passed away 8 months later, quietly in her sleep, in the room with the window facing the backyard. I was the one who found her in the morning. I've never told anyone what that was like. The service was at a Lutheran church in Asheville where she'd been a member for 40 years. People came who I didn't recognize. Old women in good coats, a man in his 80s who had worked with my grandfather, neighbors she'd had for decades. The church was full. Denise sat in the front row and cried very visibly, and accepted condolences from everyone while my mother stood slightly to the side and handed out programs. The week after the service, while we were still at my grandmother's house in Asheville sorting through her things, Denise found the binder. Gram kept her important documents in a 3-ring binder with labeled dividers: insurance, property, accounts, correspondence. She was organized in the way that people who grew up without much learn to be. Everything was clear and everything was dated and everything was in order. Denise went through that binder at the kitchen table for 2 hours. My mother made coffee and washed dishes and didn't ask questions. I was in the back bedroom sorting Gram's clothes into donation boxes and trying not to cry too much. When I came out, Denise had her reading glasses on and a legal pad next to her and a look on her face that I recognized. It was the look she got when she was calculating. "There are accounts," she said, not looking up. My mother set down a dish towel. "Accounts? Savings accounts. Several of them." Denise tapped the binder. "The house and the accounts. We'll need to talk about how this gets divided." My mother said, "Well, there's a will. The will is going to need to be interpreted," Denise said. "These things always need interpretation." I should have said something then. I know that now. But I was 26 and I had been awake for 2 days and I had just put my grandmother's gardening gloves into a paper bag and I didn't have words for what I was watching happen. I drove back to Charlotte the next morning. My mother stayed to help with the house. Over the next 3 weeks, she called me almost every evening, and every call was some variation of the same story. Denise had spoken to an attorney. Denise thought the will was ambiguous. Denise believed that as the younger child who had maintained a relationship with their mother, her words, apparently, she deserved more consideration. Maintained a relationship, I said to my mom on the phone, standing in my apartment kitchen. She visited twice a year. I know, honey. You're the one who had her in your house for 4 years. I know. So what are you going to do? Long pause. I don't want there to be a conflict, my mom said. She's my sister. And there it was. The sentence my mother had probably said in various forms for 60 years. She's my sister. The door through which Denise had walked every single time for their entire lives. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I said, "Okay, Mom," and we talked for a few more minutes and then we hung up. That was when I remembered the envelope. I had put it in my bag in Asheville and transferred it to my glove compartment when I got home, and not thought about it since, because there had been too much else to think about. But standing in my kitchen that night after talking to my mom, I remembered my grandmother pressing it into my hand and saying, "You'll know when." I went out to my car in my socks. It was February, and my building's parking lot had ice at the edges, and I didn't care. I got in the driver's seat, opened the glove compartment, and took out the envelope. My name was on the front in her handwriting, just Margot in blue ink. I sat there for a long time holding it. Then I went back inside and put it on my kitchen table and made tea, because that's what Graham would have done, and then I sat down and opened it. There were 3 things inside. The first was a letter, handwritten, 4 pages on her cream-colored stationery. The second was a business card for an attorney in Asheville, a woman named something I could barely read in the dim light, but the firm name said Estate and Trust Law across the top. The third was a smaller envelope, sealed with the words, "Give this to the attorney. She is expecting it." I read the letter twice. My grandmother had opened a revocable living trust in 1987. She had structured it carefully with the help of an attorney, and she had updated it several times over the years. The trust had a named trustee, me, not my mother, not Denise. Me, specifically by name and social security number and relationship. She explained in the letter why. She said she had watched her older daughter give too much of herself away for too long, and she knew that if she left decisions to my mother would share everything equally, even if it meant receiving nothing, because that was the kind of person my mother was. And she loved her for it, and it had to stop. She said she had tried, over the years, to balance things between her daughters in ways that Denise would never have recognized as balancing, because she was always looking at what she didn't have. She said the trust held the Asheville house, an investment account, and a paid-up life insurance policy. She had contacted the attorney. Everything was documented and structured so that the will, which she had left intentionally vague because she knew Denise would contest any will she wrote, was essentially irrelevant. The will governed almost nothing. The trust governed everything. She said, "You are a nurse, which means you already understand that the most important thing you can do for someone is be honest with them even when it's uncomfortable. I am asking you to use that skill now. Take care of your mother. Don't let your aunt take what isn't hers. And don't apologize for any of it." I read that paragraph 4 times. Then I cried for about 45 minutes, which felt right. In the morning, I called the number on the business card. The attorney's name was Lynn. She was in her 60s, extremely calm, and sounded like she had handled approximately 1,000 situations exactly like this one. She said, "Your grandmother told me you'd be calling. I've been waiting to hear from you." She said Graham had been into her office as recently as 7 months ago, updating the beneficiary designations one more time, making sure everything was clean. She said, "Your grandmother was very precise. There is very little here that can be argued with." "My aunt is already talking to an attorney," I said. "Let her," Lynn said. "She can contest the will. She cannot contest the trust. The trust is not subject to probate. It doesn't go through the court. The assets transfer directly." I wrote everything down. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Come to Asheville," she said. "Bring the envelope. We'll handle the rest." I called my mom that night. I told her I needed to talk to her about something important, and I asked if I could come that weekend. She said, of course. I didn't tell her what it was about because I didn't want her to have 3 days of anxiety, and I didn't want Denise to find out I was coming. That was a calculation that turned out to matter. I drove to Asheville on a Saturday morning in early March with the envelope on my passenger seat. I had the letter. I had Lynn's number. I had my grandmother's handwriting telling me what to do, and I held on to that the whole 4-hour drive. My mom was in the kitchen when I got there. Graham's house was still my mother's temporary base while the estate was being figured out. Denise had been pushing to list it quickly because she wanted liquid assets, but my mother had stalled because she wasn't ready to let go of the house yet. I had not known until that weekend that stalling for a few more weeks would matter. I hugged my mom and we had lunch, and I let her talk for a while about everything that had been happening, the attorney Denise had hired, the conversations that kept going in circles, the way my mom felt like she was failing somehow by not just agreeing to everything. She looked tired in a way she hadn't looked before, like she'd been carrying something heavy in the wrong way. When she finished, I told her to sit down. I put the letter on the table. I watched her read it. It took a long time because she read slowly when she's emotional, going back over sentences. At one point she stopped and looked up at me, and I couldn't tell if she was going to cry or laugh, and then she looked back down and kept reading. When she finished, she sat with her hands flat on the table for a minute. "She never told me," my mom said. "She didn't want you to carry it," I said. My mom nodded very slowly. That is so exactly what she would do. I know, Margot." She looked at me. It means the house is in the trust. The investment account is in the trust. The investment account is in the trust. Denise can contest the will all she wants. There's almost nothing in the will. My mom was quiet. "I'm meeting with the attorney Monday," I said. "You can come if you want. You don't have to." "I want to," she said immediately. That Sunday Denise came to the house. She hadn't been told I was there. She just showed up, which she did sometimes because she still thought of this as a house she had some claim to. She came in through the side door without knocking and stopped when she saw me at the kitchen table. There was a pause. That particular pause that happens between people when one of them knows something and the other can feel it but can't identify it. "Margot," she said, "I didn't know you were coming." "Hi, Aunt Denise." She looked at my mom, then back at me. "What's going on?" "Nothing," my mom said. "Margot just came to visit." Denise looked at the papers on the table. I had put Graham's letter away, but there were a few other documents out. Things Lynn had sent me electronically that I'd printed to review. Denise's eyes went to them. "Are those from the estate?" she asked. "They're mine," I said. The word mine landed in the specific way. I watched her register it. She stayed for 40 minutes. She was polite in the brittle way that people are when they're trying to read a situation, asking questions that sounded casual but weren't. At one point she said, "I just want to make sure we're all being transparent with each other. My attorney says there may be assets that weren't fully disclosed in the initial accounting." "The accounting is complete," I said. "Well, I just think it's worth, Aunt Denise." I looked at her directly. "Everything is accounted for. Everything is accounted for. Everything is handled. You'll hear from Lynn's office this week." She didn't know who Lynn was. I watched her realize she didn't know, and I watched her decide not to ask, and then she said she had another errand to get to and left. My mom let out a breath that she had probably been holding since Denise walked in. "You are so calm," she said. "Graham told me to be," I said. Monday morning, we sat in Lynn's office for 2 hours. The trust documentation was exactly what Graham had described in the letter. Clean, structured, specific. The investment account had been growing since 1987. It held municipal bonds, index funds, and 40 years of compounding. Lynn walked us through each piece methodically, and the way that people do when they've been waiting to tell you something and they want you to understand every part of it. The total was substantial. More substantial than I had been expecting, even knowing what I knew. I kept my face composed. My mother held her purse in her lap with both hands. When Lynn was done, she looked at us over her reading glasses and said, "Your mother was a very intentional woman. She ironed her pillowcases," I said. Lynn smiled. "That tracks." Denise's attorney sent a letter that week claiming the estate had been misrepresented and requesting a full accounting. Lynn responded with the trust documentation. The letter that came back was shorter and had a different tone. The letter after that didn't come at all. When assets held in a properly structured trust transfer to the named trustee, they don't go through probate. There is no court process for someone to contest. The trust documents are legal instruments that have been reviewed and signed and witnessed. Denise's attorney would have known this from the first conversation, which means he'd also told her this from the first conversation, and she had either not listened or not believed it, or had hoped some technicality would emerge. None did. My mother moved back to Charlotte in April. The Asheville house sold in June. She didn't have to take anything she didn't want to take, and she didn't have to fight for anything, because there was nothing to fight for anymore. Everything had already been handled, quietly and precisely, by a woman who ironed her pillowcases and kept a drawer full of string, and had apparently been planning this for a long time. I want to be precise about something, because I've had time to think about it. Graham didn't set up the trust to exclude Denise out of cruelty. She was careful to acknowledge in the letter that she had tried, over years, to make sure Denise was provided for in other ways. Birthday checks, holiday gifts, paying for her car repairs twice, lending her money in her 30s that was never paid back. Graham was not operating from vindictiveness. She was operating from clarity. She had watched her two daughters her entire life, and she had understood something about what each of them needed and what each of them would do with things, and she had made a decision based on that understanding. I think about that sometimes. The patience it required. Watching, deciding, planning, not out of anger but out of love that was clear-eyed enough to be practical. My mother, for her part, does not talk about any of this much. She accepted what happened with a kind of quiet gratitude that I don't have a word for. She did tell me once, a few months later, sitting in my apartment having coffee on a Sunday morning, that she thought about her mother every day, and that she was glad Graham had done what she did, not because of the money, but because it meant she didn't have to fight her sister for it. I would have given Denise everything, she said. You know that, right? I know, I said. Your grandmother knew it too. I have the letter in a fire-safe box in my closet now, folded in the original cream color envelope with my name and blue ink on the front. I've read it probably 15 times. The part that stays with me is near the end, where she writes, I kept quiet for a long time because I thought keeping quiet was the same as keeping peace. I was wrong about that for most of my life. Don't make the same mistake. I'm a nurse. I work night shifts at a hospital in Charlotte, and I take care of people in their worst moments, and I try to be honest with them even when it's uncomfortable. I've gotten better at it over the years, not just professionally, but personally. I've gotten better at saying things clearly, at not apologizing for taking up space, at understanding that silence isn't always kindness. I learned that from a woman who kept carbon copies of her letters and pressed envelopes into her granddaughter's hands at the right moment, trusting her to know when to open them. I don't have a dramatic ending to this. There was no confrontation in a crowded room. There was no moment where Denise stood across from me and I delivered some perfectly calibrated line that captured everything. Real life doesn't usually work like that. What happened instead was quieter and more complete. A trust document that couldn't be argued with, an attorney who had been waiting for my call, a mother who didn't have to fight her sister, and a small cedar-smelling house in Asheville that sold on a sunny day in June to a young couple who said they were planning to start a family there. Graham would have liked that. I think about her sometimes in the mornings, on the quiet drives before my shift, when the roads are mostly empty and the light is just starting to come up over the buildings. I think about her sitting at the edge of her bed with her tea, looking out at the backyard, just looking, not worried, not planning, just present. I didn't understand it when I was young. I think I understand it now. She spent a long time making sure things would be okay after she was gone, and then she let them be okay. So did I.